Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you joining us today. A very warm welcome to this virtual regional dialogue, Bridging the Gap, Media, Youth, and Sustainable Business Futures. This event is also taking place to commemorate Human Rights Day, organized by UNDP Business and Human Rights in Asia in partnership with the European Union. My name is Lot Ratanalaktang Joli from Business and Human Rights Team, UNDP Asia Pacific, and I'm honored to be your host today. We are gathered here to reflect on the progress, get unique insights from experts, shaping the future of responsible business in Southeast Asia, on how media catalyze transparency and how youth innovation influence corporate behavior, highlighting strategies to advance human rights and environmental goals. We will begin with our agenda. For today's agenda, we will start with our welcome remark, and then followed by a group photo. And then next, after the group photo, we'll have the interactive polls on what are Asia top business and human rights and environmental issues, followed by our panel discussion and the Q&A, and ending up with our wrap-up session. Before we proceed any further, allow me to share a few housekeeping notes to both speakers and the participants. I would like to encourage the speakers to keep within their time limit, and in the interest of time, if you have any questions relevant to the panel discussion, you may directly post your questions to specific speakers who can as well respond to those questions directly in the chat. And we will also pick out some of the questions for our Q&A sessions at the end. All right, now, to formally kick off today's event, it's my pleasure to introduce Laure Brassett, Head of the Political Press Information sections of the European Union delegations to Thailand, who will deliver the welcome remark. Over to you, Laure.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are in the world. Distinguished panelists, dear participants, on behalf of the European Union, it's an honor for me to welcome you to this regional dialogue, Bridging the Gap, Media, Youth, and Sustainable Business Futures. The European Union has long been at the forefront of promoting human rights within the global business framework. In the Asia-Pacific region, the EU has been supporting a number of initiatives on business and human rights in collaboration with businesses, governments, and the civil society. This regional dialogue is organized as a part of the Business and Human Rights in Asia project, funded by the European Union and implemented by UNDP. The EU is proud to support this flagship initiative. In partnership with the UNDP, the project has contributed to supporting our partners in Asia in advancing human rights and sustainable business practices. The EU is proud to further support the promotion of responsible business conduct aligned with international human rights standards. Just 2 days ago, another EU-UNDP collaboration was launched to the public. Complementary to today's event, focusing on the role of the media and youth in sustainable business futures, the Agents of Change, Youth, Media for Responsible Business Practices project aims to harness the potential of youth and the media as key drivers of change for corporate sustainability. It is crucial to hear the voices of the younger generations and learn how we can build a sustainable and inclusive society together. Fundamental rights like freedom of expression cannot be fully enjoyed if those who advocate them are at risk. This is why the media are seen as the fourth pillar of democracy. Journalists must be protected from intimidation and legal actions so they can do their reporting without fear of reprisal. The media and the youth must be empowered so that we can advance human rights and environmental sustainability goals for all, leaving no one behind. At the EU level, in the past years, the EU has advanced towards mandatory legal requirements on business and human rights based on the agreed international standards. The Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which recently came into force, marks the latest significant step forward in our collective efforts to introduce legal obligations for EU-linked companies to conduct human rights and environmental due diligence. The EU encourages its partners to continue to make progress in promoting responsible business conduct. In closing, let me wish you fruitful exchanges and active contributions so we can all figure out how to build a future in which the respect for human rights and for environmental protection are integral parts to all business operations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura, for setting up the stage so powerfully, highlighting the importance of, different stakeholders, including youth and media, and how this issue is becoming a very popular issue these days. Now, I would like everybody for a group picture. And first, may I kindly ask the speakers to turn on their camera, please? All the speakers, please. First, we will invite all the speakers for the pictures, and then next, I will invite all the participants to turn on their camera as well. But first, may I get all the pictures from all the speakers? We will take shortly in 1, 2, 3. Another pictures from all the participants as well, please. All the participants, please turn on your camera so that we can have a group picture together. All right, I see most of you already are turning on your camera. Any more you guys joining us? Please do turn on. All right. Okay, let's do it. 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much all once again. It was a very lovely picture. And next, before we begin with our panel discussion, I would like everyone to join me in participating this interactive poll on what, in your opinion, are the top business and human rights and the environmental issues in Asia. As now you see the poll on your screen, you can start answering them, and once done, there's a submit button as well. So we will give you 5 minutes for this polling. The first questions would be, what in your opinion are Asia top environmental challenge? You can also rank them accordingly. If you're done with the first questions, you can as well move to the second questions. Where do you see the biggest challenge in corporate responding to these business and governance issues? We can move on to the third question as well. Prioritize human rights risk below in order for the agency for Asia. And towards our last questions, in your opinion, which are the three key stakeholders that should be prioritizing when addressing corporate impacts on human rights and the environment? See a lot of answers coming in. If you are done, you can also click submit button the round at the down part. And then we'll give it a few, just a minute more so that people can still answer to this polling. Just a few more seconds before we close the polling, please. All right, I think we have got most of our answers, so we will end our polling now. Thank you all for your active participations in the polling. And before we move on to our panel discussion, I would like to inform that the recording will be shared after this event. And now we will move on to a panel discussion on bridging the gap media, youth and sustainable business futures, featuring our esteemed experts from various sectors. Allow me to introduce our moderators and our speakers. Sagita Adeshiwi, Business and Human Rights Specialist, UNDP, who will be moderating for this discussion. Moving on to our speakers, Olga Nilova, Business and Human Rights from UNDP. Chandra Verman, ESG Specialist, CEO Charisma Learning and Consulting from Indonesia. Lim Kaisin, Malaysian Youth Delegation. Kun Nishawet Panit, freelance journalist. And we have Michaela Dodini, Policy Officer, Human Rights Division, European External Action Service from the European Union. Now, may I invite Sagita to begin our panel discussion.
Thank you, Lord. I'm testing if everyone could hear me clearly. Please give me a thumb up. Okay, good. So thank you again, Lord. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you joining us from across the region. A very warm welcome to our dialogue today on bridging the gap, media, youth, and sustainable business futures. My name is Sagita Adesiwi. I'm Business and Human Rights Specialist at UNDP Indonesia, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. I would like first to thank you for spending the next few hours with us as we bring together our esteemed speakers to share insight and experiences on promoting responsible business, fostering meaningful stakeholder engagement, and advancing the intersections of human rights and environmental sustainability. This dialogue, in partnership with the European Union, seeks to explore how the media and youth are driving transparency, accountability, and action by amplifying voices, catalyzing partnerships, and shaping sustainable business futures. We will focus on understanding the interconnected challenges of human rights, environmental risk, and corporate responsibility while identifying strategies to foster collective and impactful change. We hope this dialogue will leave you with better understanding on responsible business, intersections of human rights and environment, and meaningful stakeholder engagement. We will now begin our discussion with Olga Nilova, Business and Human Rights Specialist from UNDP, highlighting the intertwined challenges of protecting human rights, achieving environmental sustainability, and fostering responsible business practices. We are very delighted to hear about UNDP's recent development on tools for human rights due diligence and their intersection with environmental considerations, which UNDP has recently launched. So Olga, could you share the inspiration behind this tool, why it was necessary, and please could you take us through some of the key features? Over to you, Olga.
Thank you, Sagita. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today about the UNDP's new practical tool for business on human rights due diligence and the environment. To answer your question, Sagita, on why this tool was developed by UNDP, please allow me to share a quick slide with the 3 global reasons for the guide being developed and 2 internal business reasons. At the global level, on your left, firstly, in 2021-2022, the UN adopted 2 milestone resolutions that recognized a healthy environment as a human right. This means that under the UN Guiding Principles on business and human rights that many of us will be speaking about today, like all other internationally recognized human rights, states, governments now have a duty to protect this new right to a healthy environment, including by adopting and enforcing laws and policies. While businesses, on another side, have a responsibility to respect this new right to healthy environment, including by integrating this new right into the human rights due diligence processes. So secondly, the second global reason, as governments continue to adopt business and human rights legislation, business and human rights laws, particularly focused on mandatory human rights due diligence, UNDP is seeing a global trend of the integration of the environment into this human rights due diligence laws. France, Germany, the Netherlands, and as you know, most recently, the European Union have introduced hard laws that set obligations for businesses active in those markets to prevent and mitigate adverse impacts on both human rights and the environment. Just very quickly, another emerging example of the integration of the environment into human rights due diligence legislation can be seen in the Republic of Korea. In this region, last year, the Democratic Party tabled a draft bill on human rights and environmental due diligence, making this draft bill the first of its kind to come forward in Asia. And the third emerging frontier in integrating human rights and the environment is the increasing environmental and climate litigation against businesses. As the total number of environmental and climate court cases against businesses has more than doubled since 2017 and is increasingly growing beyond the global north, we are seeing a trend of basing many of those court cases against businesses on human rights grounds. So environmental court cases based on human rights grounds. And at the same time, and I'm now moving to the reasons for tool being developed on the right side of the screen, many businesses across industries that UNDP has been working with, including across Asia, are not yet ready internally to meet these 3 global trends. With most companies that we've been supporting, having separate human rights teams and environmental teams that in most cases continue working in silos. And with these 2 separate and siloed teams undertaking human rights due diligence, so undertaking their human rights risk management and environmental impact assessment, so environmental due diligence in parallel, again, in absolute silos. So this is why, just to answer your question, Sigita, in the last 2 years, UNDP invested in developing this tool to help businesses and their human rights teams and environmental teams work more together and take an integrated approach to human rights due diligence and environmental due diligence and meet this growing human rights and environmental due diligence legislative requirements, laws, but also becoming more efficient with less parallel processes, with less parallel risk management or due diligence processes. Maybe I'll take 1 more minute just to highlight a couple of features. Just to be clear about the key feature, I wanted to highlight that the tool doesn't create any new standards. So nothing new in this tool. It just unpacks environmental dimensions of the existing standard, of the standard that has been there, the standard of human rights due diligence set by the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So as you see on the screen, the objective of human rights due diligence with environmental dimensions remains the same. So the objective of human rights due diligence and human rights due diligence plus the environment is exactly the same: to assess and address human rights impacts that business is involved with. But with this tool, we want to ensure that businesses assess not only, for example, labor rights, or impacts on labor rights, but also impacts on human rights that result from environmental harms. And just to conclude, the key feature, the tool takes the framework of the triple planetary crisis to explain what those human rights impacts resulting from environmental harms could be, and in what framework they could be categorized. We indicated that human rights can be impacted by pollution that businesses can be involved with, climate change, and biodiversity loss. So let me stop here before I become too technical and overwhelming. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olga. I think this tool is very important to help or guide businesses to guide businesses in unpacking environmental impacts, because as you highlighted, the HRDD is not a new standard or new platform or new framework, but rather something that business already have been doing, assessing their risks and impacts, but also looking at how this impact, their business impact, also result in the environment and human rights. So Olga, as you mentioned, there are emerging or growing mandatory human rights due diligence regulation or other similar policies or regulation and framework. So what do you believe are the biggest challenges businesses face in implementing effective human rights due diligence, particularly with respect to environmental impacts? And how can this tool, this great tool, assist businesses in overcoming these challenges? Over to you, Olga.
Thank you. Well, I think my answer will not surprise you and anyone here today. I would focus on the 3 key challenges for human rights due diligence being carried out with environmental dimensions and on an ongoing basis. Firstly, and most obviously, there's a lack of awareness among businesses, among companies, of their responsibility to respect human rights across their value chains, including their responsibility to respect the new right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. But I would say the awareness among businesses is often lacking, not of what their responsibility is, but rather of how to fulfill this responsibility. Secondly, there's a lack of policies and hard laws on mandatory human rights due diligence or human rights and environmental due diligence in countries hosting global value chains, including across Asia. We would call this as a lack of top-down regulation, so top-down pressure globally, again, in many countries, particularly those hosting global value chains. And thirdly, and finally, there is a lack of bottom-up engagement and bottom-up pressure on businesses from media, from consumers, particularly among young people, among youth, to strengthen the regulations on business and human rights, or mandatory human rights due diligence, human rights and environmental due diligence, support governments in doing so, and also to hold irresponsible businesses accountable, and being fully engaged in a dialogue and human rights due diligence processes together with businesses. And I would say now with this dedicated Agents of Change project in partnership with the EU, UNDP in Asia can easily say that we have programming to address all the three challenges for human rights due diligence and human rights environmental due diligence that businesses may face, or governments and society may face. In terms of how the tool can, support businesses and us all in addressing these challenges, I would say the key contribution of the tool is that it moved the focus from what human rights due diligence is, or what human rights due diligence with environmental dimensions is, to how to put it in practice, how to implement it on the ground. It gives a very practical insights on for example, how to integrate lived experiences of affected communities and data, qualitative data collected from affected rights holders directly, that is usually collected by human rights teams for human rights due diligence, with very much science-based data used by environmental teams for their environmental impacts assessments or environmental due diligence. Or just to give another example on what practical advice the tool can provide businesses and other stakeholders with, is the integration of human rights remediation, as we know it, in human rights due diligence, with environmental restorations. So again, it's a very practical guidance for businesses on integrate human rights due diligence with environmental due diligence. And I think it could be beneficial not only for businesses, but also for those who monitor businesses' performance and hold businesses accountable. So I would say our today's audience could equally benefit from the tool by knowing the framework of what businesses are expected to do to integrate environment into human rights due diligence. Civil society, media, and youth, young consumers can put that pressure over businesses to make a change. So yeah, let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Olga. It's interesting. I noted here how we move from what is HRDD into how to practically doing it on the ground. And one of the challenges is a lack of awareness across the value chain. So that's important to bring in all the key stakeholders in the value chain to learn about this together and to unpack the processes. And my note is here also the importance of aligning corporate risk management process with HRDD and E requirements. So this will help guiding businesses in the process. So I also see our colleague here already shared the link for anyone to download the HRDD tool, and for any further question we can discuss in the panel. Thank you so much, Olga. Now, transitioning from your perspective, Olga, we will now turn to Chandra Wirman, ESG specialist and CEO of Karisman Learning and Consulting from Indonesia, to hear insights from the business sector on ESG frameworks and also stakeholder engagement. So, Pak Chandra, thank you for joining us and for your contribution to our recent training of trainers on human rights due diligence. And as an ESG specialist with extensive experience supporting businesses in implementing responsible practices, I would like to hear about your reflection and experience from a business perspective. So during your discussion with businesses, did you explore the connection between human rights due diligence, environmental due diligence, or HRDD+E, and the broader ESG framework? Was stakeholder engagement as a key consideration during this discussion? And based on your experience, how actively are business engaging with right holders, youth, or media in these efforts? And how effective have this engagement been? Over to you, Pak.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mbak Sagita, and good afternoon, everybody. To answer your questions, begin with the stakeholder engagement. The way I see it, stakeholder engagement is very important to determine what is the most important for most stakeholders in a period of time. As we know, there are a lot of issues in human rights and also in environment, while on the other hand, we are so limited in resources. I think the meaningful stakeholders engagement with appropriate due process, it is also important, not only doing the stakeholder engagement, but also who are the stakeholders being involved. That's why you need the due process to include your stakeholders. That's also including the vulnerable. That will be the key to identify our priorities in doing due diligence process. Some of the businesses is really doing the due diligence by talking to their stakeholders. Some of the business is doing due diligence by proxy. There are many approaches and methodologies that they're doing, but of course, the result will be very much different if you are really doing the stakeholders by directly engaging with your people, with your surrounding communities, for instance. And now we have the tools combining human rights and environment. It will be very interesting. This is also to overcome silo in issues between the HR and the environment. And it means also that both parties, the human rights people and the environmental people, should learn to each other. It's also will be good example for organizations to show that how you really engage with your stakeholders. Why? Because it is part of your doing ESG activities in the companies. Although the stakeholders engagement not coming with improving your income, etc., but it's a very best practice. It's best practice for business in doing the stakeholders engagement as part of the ESG activities. How well the business, or how is the business, how the effectiveness of the engagement? I think it's varied, everybody. It's really depend on the nature of business and the type of product and services. Companies work with the extractive industry, have been doing it for so long, because they're engaged with communities. They may impact to their operation and seeing it as necessity. While the FMCG companies are having engagement with youth and media in promoting added values. So I'm not saying promoting their products, but they're promoting added values of their products. So it is a very different things, such as responsible sourcing. I think young generation now is very well informed, and they will purchase something. If they think they have some issues, HR issues to the product, as a reason to purchase, or in contrary, a reason not to purchase, or buying for a good cause. I would also to mention that communicating HR to youth should start with positive message, how well a company manages or give positive impact to others in the light of human rights, business and human rights, and it's the role of the media to present that as a part of public education or create awareness. So discussion room in the human rights is not only talking about violations, things and that, and we have seen it every day in the newspaper. There are more positive, I think, to deliver. I think I should stop here. Is there something that I haven't answered, Sagita?
No, thank you so much, Pak Chandra. I took some notes here. How you highlighted that how young people nowadays are more concerned, particularly for whether good or services, whether they are violating human rights or not. And this have been the movement within young people to highlight these issues. And on the whether meaningful stakeholder engagement in the industry has been conducted is very like, for example, you mentioned in the extractive industry, they are more maybe seen as a more advanced due to their compliance. So they engage with the right holders more than maybe other sector. For example, you mentioned for the food manufacturing. Thank you for highlighting that. So I think, I want to move to the next question. As you are aware, Indonesia has already adopted national strategy on business and human rights, or national action plan, as well as Thailand, Japan, Vietnam, Mongolia, and Pakistan in the region. And like our colleague Olga already mentioned that in other countries already have some emerging regulation on mandatory human rights due diligence. So within this, I would like to know from your perspective, what is within your assessment, what is your assessment of the industry readiness for this mandatory regulation? Are business ready within your discussion with business? And what support or resources are necessary to ensure smooth transition and meaningful stakeholder engagement? Over to you, Pak.
It's a very tricky questions. I think we never ask companies whether they're ready or not. I think we did some research a while ago with two hundreds of public companies by scrutinizing their sustainability reports. Okay. So the result will speak by itself. Okay. What we found out is less than 5% of those companies, okay, having HR policy commitment in their companies, only less than 5%. Yeah, some of them already did some HRDD and various way of HR implementations. We also note that only less than 3%, okay, 3% provide HR training. It means trainings with specific titles on HR, human rights, and having remediation access in place. Okay, so that was in 2022. I think we should see whether these figures will improve. With those numbers, you can make a guess lah. You can conclude how prepared the business in Indonesia. Yeah, and then coming to the statement from Peter Senge in one of his books, he mentioned that there are only two key drivers for a change. One is economic and the other one is politics. Economics mean companies have to change due to demand from customers, and maybe in this case it's youth and media or their shareholders. Yeah, politics means to apply some mandatory regulations like we are discussing now. I think it's just like the survey previously saw, yeah, lack of regulatory framework is one of the important things. Yeah, mandatory is the best to implement good policy, I think, in my point of view, but it comes with costs. Yeah, it depends on how far and how deep the level of implementation, of course. Yeah. Since it is about HR, again, to my opinion, that all companies are obliged to it. Okay, it's not being prioritized. These companies first and the next companies and the second. There is no prioritization here. I think it should. Yeah, I think it's something we would like to observe in the next leadership. Yeah. Then what is needed? Okay. I know it's hard, yeah, to implement mandatory regulations. Sometimes it takes 5 years. Yeah. To my knowledge, building capacity and capacity building are equally important. Yeah, sometimes this is something that we forgot. Yeah, we need managers, we need employees, business owners, media, and general public to have common understanding. Okay, it's very important to have common understanding. Yeah, on how companies should do their role of HR respect. Yeah, and then okay. The government institutions should lead by example to protect. Yeah, we need more people with expertise in HRDD, the due diligence, and all the tools related, like reporting human rights, yeah, to facilitate change. And then companies may share their positive experience to others to motivate others. Yeah. Lastly, we need youth, yeah, young generations. They are the customers now. They are the trendsetters. They are opinion leaders. Sometimes they are being advocate, yeah, and they are future leaders for sure, yeah, who shape our future then. And also important is media to get these things going in time and space. I think I should stop here.
Thank you so much for excellence. No, there's a lot of things actually to share here. It's like you mentioned from the study in Indonesia, there is only like less than 5% from the companies that being researched have human rights policies. So there is still like a long journey to understand or a long journey to develop the capacity of businesses to be ready for mandatory human rights due diligence. And I can summarize that the important to strengthen the ecosystem, like from the policymaker in the government level, to have a strong policy, and also to the enforcement, and then from the business side to also need some support on to develop their capacity, not only for the division that work on sustainability issues, but from the senior management until the other division. So it's like really interconnection between other division as well. Thank you so much, Pa. And also you highlighted the importance of to engaging with youth, because they are not only the consumer, but they're also our future workers, future leaders who could drive the changes. Thank you so much, Pa,
Thank you.
for your insights. Okay.
Thank you.
And now, after hearing some perspective from business, we would like to also now hear a young voice from Malaysia. So we will now turn over to Lim Kaisin, a representative from Malaysia Youth Delegation, to discuss the youth perspective. So we're just not hearing from the policymaker, from within our team UNDP, but we also want to hear from the voices from the young generation to discuss about their perspective on climate action and also corporate accountability. So Kaisin, welcome to our discussion. Your work has been focused on engaging young people to advocate for environmental rights and corporate responsibility. Could you share with us your work and the strategies that you have used to mobilize young people to have a stronger environmental rights and corporate accountability? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks for the introductions. And I think I would like to appreciate the appreciations from Mr. Chandra and so Ms. Saginta about the youth contributions and also the importance of youth being in this sections as well. So first, let me introduce with my introductions of my organization. So yeah, just like Ms. Saginta mentions, I'm from Malaysian Youth Delegations. So we are actually a Malaysian voluntary-based civil society organizations that we are made up of young and passionate Malaysians towards climate change. So we really play two-part role in first representing Malaysia's local youth climate movement, and also we want to raise awareness of climate policies among Malaysians. So we kind of like crafted really like a niche in climate policies and climate diplomacy. So regarding to our work throughout the year, we conducted multiple capacity building sessions, externally, internally as well. And we have extensive study sessions to educate youth on climate change, climate policy, climate diplomacy, and specifically on UNFCCC related climate agenda. So for someone that doesn't really know these jargons, it's actually the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change. Yeah, we call it UNFCCC in short. So yeah, this actually ultimately goal is to contribute towards the UNFCCC climate agenda. So before contributing to COP, we have the major event, which we call Local Conference of Youth. So it's actually an event under the umbrella of YOUNGO. So YOUNGO is the official youth constituency under UNFCCC as well. Sorry for that much of jargons, but yeah, it's kind of like making you, understand the whole structure of everything. So the Local Conference of Youth is very important because it's actually not just providing a safe space for all youth to come together to learn about climate change, to get more exposure towards the UNFCCC's climate agenda, but it's also a place for youth and industries leaders, NGOs leaders to come together to build the relationships and bridge up the gaps between everyone. And also, apart from that, Local Conference of Youth also playing a crucial role as a preparatory process for MYD as one of the main climate advocacy channel, because we have major outputs after Local Conference of Youth, which is the National Youth Statement. So that's kind of statement, it actually building up on a pre-survey that we send out to a lot of youth to make sure we collected all their inputs. And then the draft of the statement actually will be consulted, discussed as part of the agenda of Local Conference of Youth, because we want to make sure the National Youth Statement of Malaysia, it actually resonates with the insights and aspirations of the participating youth. And yeah, we just published it recently to all of the publics. And yeah, we soft launched it during COP as well. So regarding to all of our actions before COP, right, it actually act as a foundations for us to be attend to COP29. So we have delegates that following the negotiations closely on the ground at COP. This is what we dedicated to do every year, because we want to make sure that for our organizations, we have the first-hand informations, knowledge, and we get to talk with the government officials that is representing government as well. So not just that, we participate in the side events to share the outcomes of the local conference of youth, and we present the national youth statement as well to really enhance the exposure of Malaysia voices, and especially to come together with the Southeast Asian countries or even ASEAN's countries, Asians countries, to really voice out what's our need for our regions. So yeah, we have, after attending COP, we have our report published regarding to our findings and to really reflect what we have learned, what we have been observed on the ground. And it leads to our post-COP forum as well. So post-COP forum is different with local conference of youth, although it's like conference and forum, but it's actually a place for every stakeholders to come together, because we acknowledge, right? Just now we have a lot of discussions saying that multi-stakeholders engagement is very important, but we know that we just, for NGOs, not just we have to include government, NGOs, and youth into the conversations, or even like marginalized community, but also importantly, private sector, especially businesses, because it is very important for, especially, the people that the private sectors that comes from corporate sustainability background. They are the one that help us to transform all of the information that is climate related, human rights related, environmental, social, governance related, all those topics into their company and transform it to the informations and also the narrative that the company's people could understand, because the narrative is really different, like how we speak about climate in the, the UN level and NGOs level, even with the public. So I think we definitely engage with a lot of private sector. We understand it's really different. So that's why we try to have that kind of forum to provide a platform for multi-stakeholders to come together to discuss what is the results of COP and how we can localize the action items and make sure that we streamline the efforts on the ground.
Thank you so much, Kaisin. And what do you think? So you've been, it's very impressive initiative from your organization or your foundation to be part of this COP29, COP16, and then you have you bring in the voices from the youth into the national youth statement into this international fora. So how can these strategies that you have been doing with your organization could be scaled up regionally? Like, for example, maybe would there be any exchange with other countries in the Asian region, even beyond? And what are the major barriers you think that we need to address? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we have been engaged in establishing a lot of partnership with different like organizations, entity from different regions or different countries as well. And one of our side events at COP28 is actually to really have the youth negotiator from Global South and Global North to be in the same panel discussions to really have a discussions on how we can help each other to enhance for the proper climate actions. So this is because we identify in terms of the major barrier that you have been mentioned, and also I mentioned just now as well, which is really the gaps and the narrative discrepancies among different stakeholders or even like different regions as well. As we understand, different stakeholders often communicate climate issues using varying narrative, which somehow it can be lead to misunderstanding, or I think the worst is like the fragmented efforts in contributing to climate change. So to establishing a common framework or like a language for discussing climate issues is essential to unify the message and objectives and even the climate actions of different stakeholders. And I think another major barrier that especially a lot of youth organizations currently is facing is actually limited access to funding. So as you know, like we have saw it everywhere. Many youth-led initiatives actually struggling with financial constraints. So that's the thing that we actually actively trying to solve this by, you know, reaching out to different stakeholders. I think the first thing where we do is really to build the trust with different stakeholders, because we have to show we are not just, you know, just want to solve climate change in general, but we are looking into the climate policy. Yeah, that's for my organizations. So have to address the barriers requires really like targeted efforts to increase like funding opportunities. So that's what we always stand out and to advise the government, and especially for the private sector as well, to really provide us with the funding opportunities. But at the same time, for a lot of youth organizations, we have a concerns of being used for greenwashings for certain corporates as well. So that's caused it more challenging in acquiring funding, and it's really causing more limited access to funding. So for MID, we did engage with various stakeholders and, you know, like government, NGOs, youth group, marginalized communities, private sector, is to really like streamline the conversations and establishing partnerships. And we try to really like sit down with a lot of organizations to learn from each other about what's the best practices we can, you know, like learn from each other, and to bring it down to very like a local level and a grassroots level to unify the climate advocacy front and try to share resources and best practices with each other.
Thank you so much, Kaisin. Actually, I still have a follow-up question, but you already addressed some of it. So my follow-up question is, what kind of concrete support do you think are necessary from business and policymakers to advance responsible business conduct? You already mentioned that the important to have private sector to be engaged in the discussion. So not just having government and then civil society, academia, or expert in the same room, but also bring in private sector in that discussion. So that's very important. And you are also mentioning already to have youth in the same panel in every discussion as well, to ensure that these voices from our young generation also included in the discussion. And you also highlight the important to have common language that would be to help youth in for their advocacy initiative, and also in communicating with the other key stakeholders. And also very important, access to funding. That is also important to help youth for their targeted effort. So if you have some additional ideas or concrete support that you think are needed from business or policymakers, or even from the private sector, from business and private sector, please do so at this. And maybe how can we ensure youth could be part of this meaningful participation? I mean, like we know that bring in you into, like, for example, today's dialogue or in the COP dialogue, that could creating a safe space and also enhance your voices, right? But do you think is there any other ways that we could consider to help you in your advocacy efforts? Yeah, over to you.
Yep, thanks for the questions again. So yeah, to add on with my previous point, I think business really have a critical role to play, just like Mr. Chandra has mentioned as well, because to establish like a robust governance structures that can be embedded into ethical practices in their business operations is very important. So like especially regarding to, you know, like training programs for the employees to understand the responsible of code of conduct, and also to really ensuring every employee understanding ESG, and especially for the leadership team and the board of management to fully integrate ESG into the business operations. That is really important and requires a lot of work to re-educate a lot of employees. And some of this business sector, I know it's really far from, you know, like talking about sustainability and climate, but every business right now is starting to looking into it regarding to sustainability and climate change. So apart from that, like transparency in reporting of ESG performance is really important. So I understand that to talk ESG with the businesses, it has to comes down to dollar and cents, right? So it's really important to show them, the businesses, to make businesses understand that when you talk about ESG, is that you have more evidence to show and to build trust with the stakeholders and to hold the companies accountable, because that's what sustainability means. It's not, ESG mainly we talk about environmental, the human capital, the governments, but also it actually leads to the end, it's actually to the benefits of the company, the business, to be more sustainable. So we need to have that kind of acknowledgements for the businesses to really integrating ESG properly. And I agree with Olga mentions that the policymakers have to step up to the plate, and we have to set up the legislations and regulations. We need to have top-down pressures as well. So examples like Malaysia, we have mandatory requirements and guidelines for sustainability reporting, such as we have BERSA guidelines, and recently we have the National Sustainability Reporting Framework, which in short we call it NSRF. So it actually to make it mandatory, especially for the public listed company, to go through all of the guidelines, to disclose it properly, and to provide all of the evidence to enhance that, you know, they are not just disclosing, but they are really doing something for it. And all of the guidelines that is national level, it actually align with the global framework as well, which is like GRI and TCFD. And great to know that UNDP have a new framework to follow as well. And so we can see in Malaysia, we have more and more corporates starting looking into the ESG, and they have not just, you know, like normal annual report, they have sustainability report as well. But definitely, I think it's a long way to go, because a lot of companies, they still a long way to really enhance the ESG into their companies, and especially to enhance the transparency of the disclosure. So with more stringent and clear guidelines on the standards, provide like a roadmap for businesses to really commit to these compliances is very important. And I think back to youth, like what about youth, right? The future leaders that will inherit all of the consequences of today's, especially like today's businesses' decisions. So we must be at the heart of these conversations, and, you know, educations and skill development is really important to empower youth to be contribute meaningfully. And, you know, things like very simple thing like mentorship program, internship program is actually to provide youth with a guidance with seasons like professionals and give them the real world scenarios, you know, to try to drive them into more like sustainability elements, instead of making them just graduate and just looking for a job, but which they could contribute more and beyond just their own career. So like I also acknowledge that because we receive a lot of good feedbacks about the youth councils and youth forums. So with the companies and private sectors to be participate in youth councils and forums is very important to bridge the gap, to really talk with youth, understand like what is the needs of the climate change, climate issues, climate actions on the ground, and try to work with youth as well. I think it's very important. And yeah, I think just a conclusion, because I really emphasize on multi-stakeholders engagement and also collaboration as well, is to really kind of like diminishing the gaps between everyone and try to build more like a bridge for everyone to come together for a more holistic climate actions, and to foster an environment where sustainability thrive, and yeah, and provide more next generations to be on the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaisin. You are very resonating with our discussion today, bridging the gap in the sustainability efforts, right? So in the interest of time, I would like to jump over to our next speaker, and we may get back to you later. And I already see that we have so many questions in the chat, so maybe we can address this together later. And to move on to our next speaker, I would like to welcome Kun Nisa Waitpanik, an independent journalist from Thailand with expertise in reporting on environmental rights and corporate accountability, including helping with the Southeast Asian-based human rights media, Hard Stories. So Kun Nisa, your work bridges media, climate action, and business practices. So could you share how media can amplify this narrative and connect diverse audiences? So how can media outlets actually better communicate complex issues such as corporate accountability and environmental rights to the general public? So like Kaisim already mentioned the importance of having common language. So how we could communicate better to general public, fostering understanding and encouraging business responsibility. Over to you, Kunisa.
Hello, thanks for having me here, and hello from Bangkok. So I think we already have a very fruitful discussion here. And I think some of us have raised the point about having the independent evaluation. And I think like media can play a big role in monitoring and keeping track on how corporates and business like keep track on this like environmental protection. And I think the main thing is to keep in mind that environmental protection used to be viewed as philanthropy or CSR for corporates and many sectors, but the trend is changing, and there has been a growing awareness on the crisis. So right now, when we talk about environmental protection, it's the matter of accountability story.
Yeah, thank you, Kunisa. I think you highlighting the role of media to keep tracking the progress, what the private sector or business has been doing. So not just reporting, but to see whether any changes has been made. So, but how can media collaborate more effectively with youth and other stakeholders in doing so to ensure their voices are amplified and their perspectives incorporated? So within this reporting, and what do you think are the key opportunities and challenges that you encounter in doing so? Yeah, over to you.
I believe young people these days care a lot about environmental issues. Like they say that we say that we are generation of woke, right? And it's the issue of our generation. And I think media can help connecting the dots of what's going on in our neighborhoods and this global phenomenon. I remember one time that I attended one like event on clean air campaigning in Thailand, and they put the human site Greta Thunberg statue for photo opportunity there. And I wondered to myself whether are not there any other young Thai or Southeast Asian youth that protect the environment here, and so the public can look up to as role model or learn from them. And actually there are many young people here, indigenous women who fight against coal mining in the protected forest, or young documentary filmmaker who tell the stories of fluctuating Mekong River to raise awareness about the impact from climate change or ill-managed hydropowers. But their voices might not have been heard as part of the global movement. So this is how can the media can play part? We can amplifying the local voices in the global crisis that we are facing together. And media can be like a pen, not just to write coverages as we usually do only, but also be a pen to connect the dots.
Thank you, Kunisa. I think you highlight very important things, how media could play a role in amplifying local voices as a role model, including indigenous women to the global crisis. So not just looking at the role model in the global level. I think that will be a really great initiative within the countries. So I think we will stop here, and then we will offer to the next speaker. And thank you again, Kunisa, for your reflection. And now we are honored to hear from Michaela Dodini, policy officer in the Human Rights Division of the European External Action Service in the European Union, to share insights on the EU's Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So the EU has recently adopted the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive, or CSDDD. So Michaela, could you share how this new directive seeks to ensure engagement with right holders, address challenges, and promote corporate responsibility? How does this CSDDD promote meaningful right holders engagement, and how are compliance challenges being addressed? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Thank you. Very good to meet you, and greetings from Brussels, where it's climate is very cold, I think, compared to where you sit, most of you in Asia. Thank you for the question. Before I move into the due diligence directive, which is the focus of much attention since it was adopted and entered into force this summer, let me just recall that there are other pieces of policies and EU legislation, notably, that have also been adopted and entered into force recently, and that seek exactly to ensure corporate respect for human rights, including labor rights, as well as the environment and the climate. So let me just quickly also recall that since last year, there is a corporate sustainability reporting directive that is also very much about accountability and transparency on the whole range of sustainability impacts of companies. There is a deforestation-free products regulation that also entered into force last year, and it's actually, I think in Asia, the debate is also quite important. It has been viewed a bit as protectionist, etc., but the intention is really to ensure that products consumed in the EU are not associated with deforestation. So now the question is more a matter of how to, ensure and facilitate compliance, but the objective is quite clear. There is also a battery regulation that maybe is a bit less known, but also has due diligence requirements on the origin of the raw materials that enter into batteries. And we know that many of these materials, rare earths, cobalt, lithium, etc., are also, have high impacts on the environment and societies. And then maybe a small preview. Tomorrow, the forced labor regulation, or the regulation banning products made with forced labor on the EU markets, will be published and will enter into force in 2 days. So that's actually the last piece of this regulatory or mandatory wave on sustainability that we have had in the EU. Now, on the due diligence directive and meaningful rights holders engagement, I would say that it's very much at the center of the directive. There are specific articles that are devoted to the issue of meaningful engagement with stakeholders. It is required from companies in scope, and I just would like to recall that these are very large companies that are based in the EU or that have big market shares in the EU. So we're not talking about SMEs, at least not directly in scope, but these large companies in scope have to consult stakeholders at key stages of the due diligence processes. So when gathering information about impacts, developing, preventing, and corrective plans, and also if they decide to suspend a relationship. It was actually at the request of the European Parliament that language was inserted in the due diligence directive, to the extent that companies have also to identify and address barriers to engagement, so that vulnerable stakeholders really have the possibility to participate and to make their voices heard, speaking, for example, of indigenous peoples. And when they cannot be consulted directly, they can also be represented by civil society organizations and experts. And there is also specific mention in the directive to human rights defenders and environmental human rights defenders that we know have really the capacity to bring the issues up from the ground, but also very vulnerable and also at risk. And this is also why, recognizing this, the directive also foresees that companies have to protect stakeholders from retaliation or retribution, for example, by maintaining confidentiality and anonymity. Companies in scope of the directive will also have to maintain and establish a complaint procedure, where again persons having legitimate concerns about actual or potential impacts can submit substantiated or legitimate concerns, and also be assisted by, again, civil society organizations and human rights and environmental rights defenders. And of course, then the whole directive will be mandated, let's say, administered by supervisors, national authorities in member states, who can also receive legitimate concerns from interested parties. And of course, there is a new element, which is the civil liability, whereby companies can also be taken to court. And the important thing there is that this can also be the case if the damage occurs outside of the EU, as long as the mother company, let's say, is also kind of participating or are aware of this, and it is due to a failure of conducting due diligence properly. So this is actually ways in which the due diligence directive specifically mandate the meaningful consultation of stakeholders. It was a strong request from the European Parliament, and there is extensive language. Now, of course, companies sometimes ask, us, okay, what does it mean? What are the criterion for such a meaningful stakeholder engagement? We know that there are already international guidance to this extent, but the European Commission will also produce dedicated tools and guidance in order to guide this process.
Thank you so much, Michaela. I noted the important to address barriers for us to have a meaningful engagement with stakeholders, including to having the consultation in local language. So it's really important, and you are also highlighting the role of CSO or human rights defender, environmental defenders, as a facilitator in facilitating this consultation when the right holders are not able to communicate their voices. So it's really important to work with everybody in this space. And within this question, then, I would like to also ask you, what role can youth and media play in advancing responsible business conduct, and how can the EU support these actors? Over to you, Michaela. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. As it was said previously by previous speakers, media and youth have really a very important role to play in there, although they're not specifically referenced in the due diligence directive, but it is clear that they know what's going on in their communities. They, you have the links, the connections, and also, frankly, the courage. I was privileged enough to meet some of the youth defenders of some Asian countries who come to speak to us in Brussels, and you take enormous risks sometimes to your own lives or to your families. I've heard of abductions, threats, red tagging, etc. So it is a very important work that you're doing. I would like just to say that in the EU we have a couple of legal, tools there also to protect the work of journalists and whistleblowers. So I'm not familiar with the specific legislation in Asian countries, but for the EU side, for example, there was adopted a specific whistleblower directive, and also the new environmental crime directive requires to take measures to protect whistleblowers. We have also had a number of cases where whistleblowers in the EU have been threatened, harassed, and in fact there is also a specific tool which is called a directive on strategic lawsuits against public participation. We know that sometimes big companies legally harass, or even governments in some cases legally harass defenders. So these are important. We also have a Media Freedom Act, also very recently adopted and entered into force to protect media independence and journalists' work. And last but not least, I would like just to flag that the EU also runs a human rights defenders program, which is unfortunately at the moment oversubscribed because of the many regrettably violations and abuses that are committed against human rights defenders around the world. And we know that environmental human rights defenders and land defenders in many countries are really a big target of harassment. So we have a program that can be activated to protect human rights defenders at risk through temporary relocation, also support to maybe buy and maintain equipment that is secured, etc. So, and of course, we also do, I mean, the EU advocacy work. So whenever we have a human rights dialogue with a specific country, we generally also raise persons of concern, so cases of persons who are either in jail already or harassed, intimidated, etc. So we can also do this, and we do it increasingly for human rights defenders that are active on business and human rights and environmental issues. So this is also a way where we really put, our diplomatic means to play. We also, of course, supporting projects in many countries, protecting media freedom, civic space, and we're very happy also to be partnering with UNDP and with all of you for the implementation of this project that takes a very innovative and bottom-up approach to the issue of business and human rights, and very well complements also efforts that have been undertaken previously more on the government level, on the national action plans, and where I hope that also civil society and media and youth were also associated in the development thereof. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michaela. No, it's rightly so. I mean, like UNDP and the EU have been working together in partnership for this bottom-up approach to work with youth and media to have to promote these responsible business practices. And we also took note that the EU also have this programming with youth defenders and also even have whistleblower directives. So I think because again, in the interest of time, we have so many interesting discussion from everyone here, and we see now so many questions in the chat, and I would like to offer to my colleague, Lot, if you could highlight maybe a few questions, because I know, thank you to the speakers who already also have responded the question in the chat, but yeah, we could highlight more, maybe 2 or 3 questions. Over to you, Lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sagita. And thank you for all your questions in the chat box as well. The discussions on the chat box itself has been very interesting. And thank you so much to the speakers as well for your prompt response. And I think most of the questions that were asked in the chat box have been responded. But I just have one question for Chandra. We just want to hear your reflections that, in regards to human rights issue falling under procedural business settings, personally in ESG in business, that, most of the time ESG tend to be a significant factors for the due diligence and should be monitored by joint actions of the government and independent parties for evaluation to corporate compliance. What are your thoughts and reflections on this?
Right. Since at least for Indonesian case, because human rights due diligence is not yet to be a mandatory or statutory regulations here in Indonesia. Companies in Indonesia, I think some companies already did human rights due diligence process. Begin with the agricultural industries, followed by mining industries, agroforestries that I saw they do the due diligence. If you check or you review the report of due diligence process, it can be vary. I think it's also important to highlight here that what is due diligence process actually, what is the meaningful stakeholders engagement, what kind of approach can be used by different companies using different approach, what kind of reports that should be established after you're doing the due diligence process, and what is the process after the due diligence. this kind of frameworks, I think it should be there for companies to follow on. Yeah. If the companies is simple, so they can use a simple tools. If the companies is complex, they can take their more sophisticated tools to do their due diligence. It should be acceptable to the stakeholders also. So if it is not acceptable to most of the stakeholders, like for EU, for instance, then it will be meaningless, of course, for companies or doing the due diligence. So I think a lot of work should be done. Do we need independent reviewer? Yes, I think it's case by case, not necessarily all of them. It's really depend on the risk, yeah, of the human rights risk, yeah, and we need. I think in the business there is a role of a government as an accreditation function, right? Who can do the due diligence process? What kind of methodology should be used? And that will be the roles of the government. So it shouldn't be like regulating everything in detail for businesses. It will be a very hard task for everybody to doing that. But I think again, we need to have a good framework that everybody agreed on. I think that's from me.
Thank you very much, Chandra. I think it leads to a very meaningful what will the government as well as the private sector can do in order to in regards to this due diligence as well. And in the interest of time, I would need to hand back to Sagita for the final closing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Lord. I think now, I think we have so many discussion already in the chat. So if there are some questions that have not been addressed by us or by the speakers, please feel free to reach out to us and we can continue the conversation outside this webinar. And now I think we have the polling result, Lord. Can we please share this with everyone?
The polling result.
Yeah, everyone could see it in the yes. So we could see there's see in the screen. I think it's everyone have selected almost all the options. So I think, look, can you highlight which one is? I think it's about the average, no? About the same, yeah. So yeah, for the environmental challenges, I think it's quite climate change is quite more prominent than others. It doesn't mean that the other challenges are not important. It's just that based on the participants today, everyone see climate change is the most important to be addressed in the region. Okay, and then the next question.
And after all, I think all the issues that were pointed up for the polling tend to be of an importance issue, but it's just that climate change tend to show the most important issues for all of us here.
Yes, and the next question, can you share what is the percentage?
Even for the second questions in regards to, biggest challenge in corporate responding to business and governance issue, for us here, the most prominent issues in here would be weak regulations, framework, and enforcement. This tend to come as the first, among all of the choices, and then followed by the lack of the corporate accountability and transparency, and as well as the insufficient stakeholders engagement by business. These are the three highlights from the second questions. Moving on to the third questions, in regards to, prioritizing the human rights risk in order of urgency for Asia. In this question, labor exploitations tend to be one of the most urgent issues in here, and then, followed by labor rights violations as well. And implementing mandatory measures is also a thing that is urgent at the moment. That were the three highlights for the third questions. And the last questions in regards to stakeholders engagement, which three key stakeholders that should be prioritized when, addressing corporate impacts on human rights and environment. The first one that comes up in here is which has the most highest percentage is in regards to the rights holders, which is including indigenous populations and the local communities. And followed by the workers, 65% of you have answered in regards to the workers. And we also have the civil society, which includes environmental and human rights defenders. These are the top, in regards to stakeholders engagement.
Thank you so much, Lois. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation in the polling. We will utilize your feedback and inputs here for our next conference. So stay tuned in our platform. So last but not least, we would like to welcome our dear colleague, Harpreet Kaur, Business and Human Rights Specialist from UNDP Asia Pacific, on her key takeaways from the discussion today. And Harpreet, as you see, we have so many interesting discussion in the panel as well as in the chat. And how does this dialogue today resonate with your experience from the Responsible Business and Human Rights Forum in Bangkok or the UN Human Rights Forum in Geneva? Over to you, Harpreet.
Great. Thanks, Agita, and thank you for guiding today's discussion. I think with such depth and clarity. Of course, the discussion seems to have really triggered a lot of questions. And I was trying to take notes, copious notes, but I don't think I can do justice with that. So maybe let me try to just kind of, see what the key takeaways I see and the and the connections that I see and I've heard from the other forums and the other regional events that we have attended and participated in. So I guess, in some ways, today's dialogue really brought together a rich diversity of perspectives, from the innovative tools and the strategies, I think, shared by Olga, by Park Chandra on integrating human rights and environmental considerations, but also Park Chandra's insights on the diversity of approaches and levels at which businesses are currently conducting human rights due diligence. And I guess the importance of meaningful stakeholder engagement and how that just in terms of how diverse that is in the way that the businesses and other stakeholders are approaches. I kind of, something that he said really stood, really stood by in terms of, when he said that change requires economic incentives driven by consumers, media, and public pressure, but also the political frameworks like the evolving mandatory human rights due diligence landscape. So I thought that kind of, does provides us that sort of a playing field for now. And I just couldn't agree more than that, because these are the forces that together align market demands, but also regulations in some ways that compel businesses towards responsible practices. So I guess, just in terms of taking it forward, we also heard from Lim, who really brought a refreshing perspective, highlighting the energy and accountability that the youth bring to the table. And I particularly liked how she underscored the need for private sector engagement to drive the meaningful change, while cutting through the acronym soup that we've all gotten so used to and making these complex issues more accessible and actionable. Again, Nisha emphasized the critical shift from philanthropy to corporate accountability and in how businesses address adverse environmental impacts. Noting that the reality isn't black and white, but often gray. So also highlighting the role of media in amplifying narratives and fostering public awareness. And speaking to what Lim said is making simple and making these conversations kind of more accessible and relatable. I guess finally, Michaela's reflections on EU's regulatory wave, including directives from CS3D. Again, the acronym soup starts here, CS3D to CSRD, the regulations around forced labor, deforestation, and batteries. I think it gives us a powerful glimpse into how policy can lead the charge in driving corporate responsibility and systemic change, and that it requires continuous support and continuous guidance to making sure that these policies, to make sure that the implementers have the right tools and the guidance, but also support to be able to implement these. Now, the discussions that we've had today really echo the key messages from the UN Responsible Business and Human Rights Forum in September and the Annual Forum on Business and Human Rights, which took place last month in Geneva. Again, both forums underscored the deep interconnectedness of our challenges, safeguarding human rights, addressing environmental risk, and strengthening accountability in business practices. And one of the key challenges that we heard often at these forums was really around the multiplicity of tools and guidance materials, yet no comprehensive framework. And I think I like what Olga mentioned in terms of, how the human rights due diligence and environment tool does not create new requirements, but really builds upon and consolidate existing requirements and standards with clear steps and guidance, I think, which hopefully is a welcome step also from the businesses and the users of this guidance. What stood out today was the consistent emphasis on meaningful stakeholder engagement and the value of inclusivity, participatory and constructive dialogue. I think these are the messages that align perfectly with the insights from the other forums and the events that we've seen in the recent times. Again, there's a lot that that basically we've a lot of key messages, but I guess one of the key messages that really stood out to me today is an area where there's still an untapped potential, the role of media and young people. Their contributions in some ways were less prominent in those earlier forums that we've seen in the recent times. But I guess there's a huge opportunity to mainstream business and human rights issues, making them more relatable and accessible for the general public and a broader audience. And the dialogue today really underscores the importance of harnessing that potential, ensuring these critical conversations reach beyond specialized circles and our echo chambers and resonate much with wider communities. The solutions that we heard today really lies in collaboration, in transparency, and meaningful engagement across all stakeholders, but also all sectors. So to conclude, I really would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all our speakers for their candid and thought-provoking insights, to our partners at the European Union for their continued support, and to the UNDP team for organizing this meaningful dialogue. To everyone who joined us today, your engagement and participation, I think these are all what make these discussions impactful. The questions raised and the ideas shared today will undoubtedly inform and inspire future initiatives that we are moving ahead with. And as we move forward, I guess let us not lose the sight of the larger vision to bridge the gaps between sectors, amplify marginalized voices, and foster sustainable businesses future that respect human rights and planet. Lastly, I'm thrilled to share that our event, Corporate Sustainability and Environmental Rights in Asia, would bring together some of these conversations further here in Asia. It's scheduled to take place on 18th and 19th March. So I hope you stay tuned for updates and mark your calendars, and we look forward to seeing you there. Until then, thank you all once again for being part of this journey. Take care and have a wonderful day and evening ahead.
Thank you so much, Harpreet. Thank you so much again to our panelists for sharing your insights, and to all the participants, and of course to our partners, the European Union, and to the UNDP team for making this discussion possible. Please stay tuned, and here in the screen is our next event that Harpreet has been shared, Corporate Sustainability Environmental Rights in Asia. Mark your calendar, 18 and 19 March. Please stay tuned. Until then, thank you and have a great day. Take care.